So the farm is roughly 250 acres, and we grow crops on 85 of our own, and then I rent 15 from the neighbors, but only those neighbors that I can drive across the field to and get. So no tractor trailers, no moving stuff up and down the road. We're tiny as a wheat farm. My challenge here is that we are big enough so that we have, there's a window for planting and harvesting, and it's just me. So I have equipment that's big enough to probably do 300 acres and all the costs of that equipment to do 300 acres, but I'm only farming 100. But you kind of have to have that because, if you're trying to use a tiny combine on 100 acres, you may run out of window. It may start raining before you get your harvest done, or you just can't get it all done in time. I mean, the wheat farms out west are thousands of acres. In Canada, they're 10,000 acres. The guy that I bought the combine from was farming 1,600 acres. That turned into 3,200 acres. He needed a bigger combine, so I ended up with his smaller combine. I mean, 3,000 acres in Canada is nothing.
Yeah.
These days, that's a small farm. I would love to grow the heritage grains. I would love to grow spelt and emmer and einkorn and then any, native Virginia grains. Those are hulled wheats. They have to come out of the hull before you can process them, which means you need a dehuller. That's another piece of equipment to put in this tiny little space here that used to be an old hay barn. And I don't know that there is a tremendous demand for spelt and einkorn. It's delicious. I don't think it's extremely easy to bake with. I think the bakers, like to be able to bake with those heritage grains, and I don't know that people are willing to pay that kind of a price premium that we would need to get because, wheat, when way back when, wheat was very tall. And you see pictures in the Fertile Crescent of people harvesting wheat, and they were probably shorter then, but the wheat's a lot taller than they were, right? Now wheat is 18 inches to 2 feet tall. So maybe up to my waist, maybe, depending on the variety. Over the years, as we've hybridized that wheat, we've made it shorter so that it doesn't get blown down in a thunderstorm flat on the ground where you can't harvest it, right? That's one of the issues. So when you're growing an ancient grain, if it's truly an ancient grain, there's your first issue, is this is really at risk, especially in Virginia, especially in May and June when it's drying out. And here come Mother Nature decides she's going to do one of those afternoon 60-mile-an-hour thunderstorms, and you walk out the next morning and all your crop is flat on the ground. And you can't get a combine in that. So there's a lot of risk in that. Once again, that's going to drive the cost of growing it. The yields are very low as well. So you've got, and you're not going to be planting it like you would plant regular wheat. So you've got weed pressure. If you're trying to grow it organically, it's tough. Wow. Taking wheat that's grown commercially to an elevator, and getting whatever the elevator's paying, $10, $12 a bushel, whatever it is at the time, is a totally different business than what we're doing. They're not cleaning. They're not selecting for varieties that are in demand by the artisanal baker, right? I mean, they get used to baking with they used to get baking with certain wheat, and that's. Yes, they'll experiment, and yes, they kind of have to, bob and weave a little bit as things change and as harvests change. But that's a whole different market than throwing it in a tractor trailer. I mean, if you had a couple of $1 million to spend and you wanted to get in the grain business, well, a couple of million wouldn't be enough because a couple of million will buy you, a combine and a tractor these days. But if you had a wide expanse of land and you were going to go into the grain business and you wanted to take a huge financial risk, you probably wouldn't be growing artisan wheat for artisan bread makers.
And why are you?
Well, because I can sell all the wheat that I can grow on we grow 100 acres, but we rotate it every 3 years. So I'm only growing 30 acres of wheat a year.
Gotcha.
So it's 100 acres, but you don't want to plant the wheat on top, especially organically. Then you're really asking for trouble because anything that might be wrong with your crop one year is going to be in the soil the following year. So you want to plant something that's not going to be affected by whatever problems there may be that Mother Nature has given you. So you're only really doing a 30 30 acres. So, 30 acres and then your organic yields aren't necessarily that great compared to conventional yields because fertilizer is always an issue. And so you can expect to get X number of pounds of wheat. And once the mills and the bakers say, yes, I'll buy that much. The first couple of years I got lucky in one way and unlucky in another. We realized that because the land hadn't actually been actively farmed for probably 15 or 20 years, it was in a conservation reserve program. And that requires that you cut it at least once a year and everything gets returned to the soil, which is great from a soil standpoint, right? Because all that's, break it down into mulch and adding value in the soil. That's the good news. So when you plant your first crop in there and you till the ground up and you get all the tree stumps out that have grown up and you finally have a crop-ready field, it's got a lot of nutrients in it. So I got lucky in that first round because I was able to draw all that out. And then it became a nutrient management issue when I ran out of nutrients, right? So what do we do next? So you either, if you're going to do it organically, you have to have organically proved inputs. It would be great if we had animals here, but we don't have any animals here and we don't intend to get into, that's a whole nother deal, right? Grazing cattle or sheep or goats or whatever. So inputs are an issue, and then we probably have a 50 to 75 year seed bank of Johnson grass seed, and Johnson grass being a noxious rhizome-based perennial, it interferes with everything that I want to grow that would be growing from May through October. So that drove us to look at, roundabout way to get to your question, but that drove us to look at what can we grow in the wintertime that's a cash crop. And hard red winter wheat turned out to be something that bakers really like. And you plant it in September, October, November timeframe, typically in late October. And then you harvest it in July. And yes, the Johnson grass has grown up, but the wheat's ready to harvest at that point, so you're not competing for nutrients and that kind of thing. So that hard red winter wheat turned out to be the cash crop for us. I have been growing a variety called New East, which was developed in North Carolina with the USDA and I think maybe NC State. And they bred this variety to be resistant to the moisture issues that we have here and the heat issues and those soggy springs and that kind of thing, and the relatively mild winters. And so far, it's been okay. We've been able to save seed and we've been able to grow it from year to year. And there's a good market for it. I don't know how long, given climate change, I don't know how long that's going to last before we start seeing the effects of maybe, some fungus and disease and that kind of thing, because it's bound to hit. The first thing you have to do is you have to prepare the ground. And we've tried a number of different ways to do that. We've tried minimum till, no till, and conventional tillage, but we're organic, so we don't do any spray. Because we don't spray, it makes no-till really difficult. Because when you're no-tilling, you're just drilling into whatever was growing there before, and whatever's growing there before here is ragweed and Johnson grass and sedum and all the nasty stuff that grows. This year is our second year of using the Rodale Institute's no-till program, which involves a roller crimper on the front of the tractor, rolling down a thick mat of ryegrass, taking the planter behind you and just no-till drilling right into that mat of ryegrass. In theory, I love to do it. That to me is the holy grail, where you can make one pass to the field, you're not disturbing the soil underneath, you're not breaking up that layer of mycorrhizal fungi, you're not, everything that's working in the soil and the soil food web gets to work without my moldboard plow going through. The challenge is getting the ryegrass mat thick enough so it'll block out the weeds, right, and yet your crop can grow through it. So I started out, I planted 60 pounds per acre, 65 pounds per acre, which was, about average rye planting, maybe a little light. I went to Rodale when that didn't work, and I said, guys, what have I done wrong here? I read the book twice. What happened? And they said, how thick did you plant the rye? And I said, well, 65 pounds an acre. They said, oh, you need to be 160 pounds an acre. So we planted rye seed at 160 pounds an acre, and if I try it again, I'll probably try to get, I don't even think the seed drill will plant it at 200 pounds an acre, but wow, I might try it. I would have liked to have been able to afford to fertilize that heavily as I would have a cash crop, because I think I would have gotten a much better stand. We planted sun hemp into it this year, and if we go out later on, we can take a look at that on the right side of the driveway as we go out. Sun hemp will pretty much grow here under any kind of environment, so I figured if I take the best summer growing crop that I've got that can outrun the Johnson grass and try it in this roll down, instead of trying something that might be a little more delicate and need a better prepared seed bed, let me try this and see what happens. And so far it looks like it's going to come up okay. So maybe we can use that at least once during the year to roll down and not till. Yeah, all this area behind us is all seed cleaning equipment, so we basically can save our seed and use it the next year. Turn the earth over, let it relax for a little bit, disc it, drag a land leveler behind that to get it smooth, plant right into that, or maybe let it wait for a week or so and let some weeds sprout, and then a light disking after that as you plant, or something along those lines. And that's just conventional tillage. The problem is you are disturbing the soil. Earthworms don't like it. The mycorrhiza, the fungi doesn't like it. I mean, so it's that, or it's try to grow something in a weed patch. A hard red is a fairly strong wheat, so it's got a lot of protein. I get a pretty good falling number, which is, low falling number is evidence of sprouting in the field. So it's really more about as much about when you harvest it as about the wheat itself. But a baker is looking for a good high falling number and a good high protein, so that the stronger the wheat, the longer it can survive a fermentation, right? So if you're fermenting for a long period of time and your wheat doesn't have the gluten strength, it's going to break down and the fermentation isn't going to work. So in addition to that, the hard red has tannins, which give it the flavor. So if you see a kind of a brown wheat loaf, that's probably 100% hard red. Whereas some of the lighter wheats and the soft spring wheats, like an Appalachian, are going to produce more of a white bread. Mm-hmm. When you go to the grocery store and you buy white bread, that has been through a roller mill, and the germ and the bran and the starch has all been separated. When you're stone grinding, as we're doing here regionally, when you stone grind, all that is together, and all you're just doing is sifting out a little bit of the bran. And so you get all the nutrients in there, and you tend to have, with a hard red winter wheat, which is a darker kernel because of the tannins, and you start to get a darker flour, which makes a darker bread. Because I'm involved closely with the Common Grain Alliance, I think we're seeing, my experience is that yes, we are seeing more people that want to get into growing wheat and baking bread, and I think that's fantastic. It's great. They are going to have the challenges that small farmers have. Is, at some point you can harvest by hand and you can cut it down with a scythe, as you said earlier, and you can dry it out in stacks in the field, and then that might be great. And there's a certain number of acreage that your physical manpower, or if you have a number of children, how much labor can you find to help you with this? And that's going to be the limitation on how much you can grow until you start to say, okay, now I've got to go get some equipment. And then the price of poker really goes up. I mean, then it becomes a whole different ballgame. I think we don't necessarily have the tremendous investment in a particular type of monoculture farming that's geared to do one thing. So, corn, beans, wheat, we take our corn, we put it in our tractor trailers, we take it to the grain elevator. It has to be cleaned. We don't have the ability to, okay, this year we're going to grow this, or that year we're going to grow that. I think that takes, that's a real leap of faith for people that have millions of dollars tied up in, various types of extremely expensive equipment, to step out and say, I think I'm going to do organic buckwheat this year. Maybe I can find a market for that, or maybe there's a little market for that. They know that they can take it to the elevator and they can get X number of dollars, and they're playing the futures market, and they're doing all those things with, with commercial grain growing. And I don't know that, it's up to the smaller guys and gals to say, let's go try this and see if this will work, because we're being asked to do that. Like right now, I think there is there's a lot of interest in Virginia heritage wheats. What grain was growing in Virginia when the settlers came, and can we grow that wheat again, and what does that wheat taste like now, and is that something you can do? Well, on a smaller scale, if you have a place where you can do test plots and you're not relying on having to plant a couple of 100 acres on this because you can't find the seed to start with. So yes, if you're smaller, you're more nimble, you're more likely to do that. You're also more likely to have a full-time job, which would allow you to do that. Well, frankly, the Common Grain Alliance has been great because it has drawn in the end users, being the bakers and the millers, to meet the farmers that are growing, and now we're responding to their requests for particular types of crops and particular types of wheat. Let's go try growing this, and let's try growing that, and I'd like to try baking with this, and would you grow some of that? It is a group of farmers, millers, and bakers that have come together to further the regional grain economy and awareness of a regional grain economy. And it has really taken off since its inception. I mean, not only from a geographic standpoint, but the public awareness now. People are finding other people that they would just never have found without the Common Grain Alliance website and the Common Grain Alliance functions that go on and that type of thing. I'm old, so it's all kind of fuzzy, but as I look back on that, I think it all kind of happened at about the same time. I knew that there was a market for buckwheat flour at Deep Roots Milling, for instance, down in Lowesville. Will Brockenbrow at the time was making a buckwheat pancake mix, and I took him my first buckwheat crop. And then, that turned into, you need to meet this person, you need to meet that person. And then when I ran into Sub Rosa, for instance, in Richmond, then all of a sudden, we're 30 miles away, and it was a great connection, and, he liked what we were doing, and things just kind of took off from there, and then met all kinds of other great people, and now it's like there were all these wonderful people doing all this wonderful stuff, and I wish I could grow more wheat for them. I can sell every bit of wheat that I can grow. I mean, that's not the issue. And I think as the consumer starts to understand the difference between wheat that is grown in fields that are sprayed with Roundup or wheat that has actually been sprayed with Roundup to kill it quickly so they can harvest it earlier, which, yeah, I get that reaction.
Know that.
Rye as well.
Yeah.
So you grow a cover crop of rye in the wintertime, which is great. I'm going no-till, I'm growing a cover crop of rye in the wintertime. That's good for the soil, it's beautiful. And then come in and spray with Roundup, harvest it, and sell it for animal feed. So now it's in the food supply. See, that kind of thing makes me crazy. So as people start to understand the difference between large-scale commercial farming that uses a lot of chemicals and the small farm, and how labor-intensive and difficult and risky and capital-intensive it is to produce enough grain on a regular basis so that you can supply a baker who's making a living selling wheat commercially. Once that light bulb comes on, $7, $8, $9, $10 a loaf for bread, doesn't matter because they're doing it for a different reason. When you get ready to plunk down your hard-earned dollars, understand why that loaf of handmade organic bread costs what it does. Really educate yourself to understand it, and it won't bother you to pay whatever that person needs to ask to make sure that we can all keep doing this down the line, because the alternative is you're buying something that is mass produced in a roller mill at scale, have no idea where it's come from, what it's been sprayed with, or any of that. But it's cheap, and it's there when you want it until it isn't. And I don't know whether statistics would support this comment, but what appears to me to be explosive growth in the farmers markets around the region and probably in the United States. And in that farmers market environment, you're going to find a baker offering fresh, homemade baked bread. And that's just a wonderful way to get people to understand all the differences that we talked about earlier, their flavor profile, and tell the story of the farmer, and is this organic, or is this, how does this compare to that stuff that I buy on the shelf? There's healthy food out there if you make an effort to find it.
What's a really good question that a consumer can ask you?
It would be, I think, tell me how your wheat is grown. Because I think that is going to draw out things like, it's important to me not to use chemicals. It's important to me to make sure that I'm respecting what's going on in the soil. It's important for me to leave my field edges so that the pollinators can, have something left, and I don't have, pesticide drift that's killing everything all the way to the tree line. Those are things that I think about as I go through my everyday farming. And I think, ask your farmer that, how do you farm? Tell me how you farm. Tell me what's important to you while you're farming, and you'll start to learn. Because farmers they're just going to want to talk about what they do all day long, right? As you have seen.